Okay, this is the last part 3, Reconstruction in the South. What is it like in the South during Reconstruction? What is their point of view on everything? Come on, computer. And this will be the last set of notes with voiceovers that you will have to hear this year. So congratulations, I'm clapping for you. Yay, we made it through. All right. So, Reconstruction governments helped reform the South. The KKK was organized as African Americans moved into positions of power. And as Reconstruction ended, the rights of African Americans were restricted, and we saw that with the Black Codes. Southern business leaders relied on industry to rebuild the South. Republicans will be gaining strength with Grant becoming president in 1869. The Republicans controlled the most Southern governments. They were heavily supported by African American voters, and the Republicans were unpopular with Southern whites. All right, what is a carpetbagger? What is a scallywag? So, carpetbaggers, those are Northern-born Republicans who moved to the South after the war. They are Northerners that accused them of rushing to move to the South to profit from Reconstruction in some way. A scallywag is a name a Southerner gave to white Southern Republicans. They were known as greedy rascals, and the Democrats believed that these Southerners had betrayed the South by voting for the Republican Party. All right, let's talk about some African American leaders. Hiram Revels is an African American born in North Carolina, went to college in Illinois, served as chaplain in the Union Army, and in 1870 became the first African American in the U.S. Senate. Blanche Bruce grew up in slavery in Virginia, Republican in Mississippi, served one term as a U.S. Senator. So there's some famous, noteworthy, important African American leaders following the Civil War, which was very hard to do at that time because of all the discrimination and things put in place, such as Black Codes. Repairing the South. Southern states were under Republican control. They're spending large amounts of money, and to get the money for projects in the South, they had to raise the taxes and issue bonds. The Reconstruction governments provided new building projects and advancements in the variety of areas. They are the first state-funded public schools are in the South. New hospitals, new prisons, orphanages, because like we said, many parents, maybe they were killed during the war in some way, whether they were involved with the fighting or not, maybe murdered. As far as former slaves, some of the children are left behind. Their parents were sold. They don't know where they are. They passed laws prohibiting discrimination against African Americans, and the construction of the railroads, bridges, and public buildings would take place. So there were some good things coming out of the Reconstruction government policies that were going into place. Now, the Ku Klux Klan. The more African Americans are taking political office, it's causing more white Southerners to resist Reconstruction. They viewed the government as corrupt, illegal, and unjust, and they disliked federal soldiers stationed in their states. So the KKK was created by a group of white Southerners in Tennessee in 1866. Now, this is the beginning of the Ku Klux Klan. Later, when we talk next year about the industrial boom and immigration and everything in the United States, they are more against any type of immigrant that comes into the United States. But originally, they are against African Americans. They are a secret society that opposed civil rights, particularly voting for African Americans, and they would use violence against African Americans. The membership did grow quickly throughout the South. They hid their identities by wearing robes, disguises. They would attack African Americans, white Republican voters, and public officials. They would attack at night. And little was done by the local governments to stop the violence, and the KKK would become a challenge to Reconstruction. The federal government will take action against them. In 1871, Congress passed laws making it a federal crime to interfere with elections. So the federal crime to deny citizens equal protection under the law. Within a few years, the Klan was no longer an organized threat. Reconstruction is going to begin to lose steam. People are kind of like over it. They're sick of the arguing that takes place, the different things being brought up. They're like, let's just kind of get together, move on, and get over this. Republicans lost control of the southern state governments to the Democratic Party. The General Amnesty Act of 1872 allowed former Confederates to serve in public office. Most of them were Democrats. Many were elected to southern governments. The Republicans begin losing power in the North, and President Grant is reelected in 1872, But some scandals during his presidency lead to a loss in support. So people are starting to blame Republicans for such things as the Panic of 1873, which we will get more into next year when we talk about that time period. There are some bad investments that take place. J. Cook and Company was a major investor in the railroads. They are a large financier of the Union's Civil War effort. In September of 1873, they declared bankruptcy, and the company lied about the value of land along the side of the Northern Pacific Railroad that it owned and it was trying to sell. The truth leaked out to the public about the lie, and it caused the company to crumble financially. You then have the Panic of 1873, which, like I said, we'll talk about again next year. The failure of J. Cook and Company sent panic through the stock market. Investors began selling shares of their stock faster than people wanted to buy them. The companies are buying their shares back from investors, and 89 of the nation's 364 railroads had failed. The failure of 18,000 other businesses followed in the next 2 years. So what's the effect of the Panic of 1873? Well, by 1876, unemployment is at 14%. 2 million people are out of work, and it's causing numerous strikes and protests around the country, and many are linked to the railroad industry. Democrats gained control of the House of Reps in 1874, and the Northerners are becoming less concerned about Southern racism and more concerned about financial well-being. Republicans are losing support in the North, too. The Northern support for Reconstruction is fading. Voters are focusing in on financial problems, and in 1874, Republicans lost control of the House of Reps. They did pass the Civil Rights Act of 1875, which guaranteed African Americans equal rights in public places like theaters and public transportation. But the Republicans overall begin abandoning Reconstruction just due to the fact that Americans are being concerned about the economy rather than the government corruption and what needs to be done with that. The election of 1876, Republican candidate Rutherford B. Hayes is ending federal support of the Reconstruction governments. So Democrat candidate Samuel J. Tilden it's a very close election. Tilden appears to have won, and the Republicans challenged the electoral votes in Oregon and 3 southern states, and the commission made up of members of Congress and the Supreme Court justice were appointed to settle the issue. The outcome of that election is they decided to give the disputed votes to Hayes, and Hayes won the presidency by 1 electoral vote. So the compromise of 1877 was the Democrats agreed to accept Hayes' victory, but in return, they wanted all remaining federal troops taken out of the South. They asked for funding to improve the South, and they asked for a Southern Democrat to be appointed to the president's cabinet. Hayes takes office and removes the last of the troops from the South. All right. Redeemers. Hold on, I'm just looking through my notes here really quick. What are redeemers? Seeing how many more we have left. Those are Democrats that brought their party back to power in the South. They are gradually regaining control of the state governments. They moved quickly to get rid of Reconstruction reform, and they wanted to reduce the size of state governments and limit the rights of African Americans. They lowered the state budgets, got rid of social programs, cut property taxes, cut funding for schools, and limited African American civil rights. So everything that was pushed for and fought for through those Reconstruction plans is basically erased. Poll taxes are set up by the Redeemers, and that's an effort to deny the vote to African Americans. A poll tax is a special tax that people had to pay before they could vote. Some states required them to pass a literacy test. There was also the grandfather clause, which was put into place, and that stated that the law affected men whose fathers or grandfathers could vote before 1867. So basically, if you're an African American, your grandfather did not vote ever. So you would not be able to vote because you'd have to pay that tax, and you probably couldn't afford to do so. Voters did not have to pay a poll tax or pass a literacy test, and it allowed every white man to vote. So Redeemers introduced what was known as segregation, and we'll get into this more next year too. Segregation is that forced separation of whites and African Americans in public places. So restrooms, schools, transportation, anything. Later down the road, we have transportation means like buses. Jim Crow laws are laws that enforce segregation. It's an accepted practice in the southern states in the 1880s and will be through the first half of the 1900s. Both of these were challenged by African Americans. In 1883, a Supreme Court ruled that Civil Rights Act of 1875 was unconstitutional. The 14th Amendment applied only to actions of state governments. Private individuals and businesses could practice segregation. So it says that if you're a private individual, you can do whatever you want. Plessy versus Ferguson. I know we talked about this during Constitution, but I just want to go over it really quick. In 1896, it's a Supreme Court case. In 1892, Homer Plessy took a seat in the whites-only car of a train in Louisiana. He's arrested and put on trial. He's convicted of violating Louisiana's segregation law. Plessy argued that the law violated the 13th Amendment, denying him equal protection under the law. But the court ruled that Louisiana, because of separate but equal law, was constitutional. So as long as they had a separate facility for him, it was constitutional. All right, sharecropping. Few African Americans could afford to buy or rent farms. Their moving west was very costly for them, and they couldn't do that. So some tried to make a living in the cities. Many African Americans remained on plantations, and they took part in sharecropping, and that is sharing the crop. The landowners provided the land, tools, and supplies, and the sharecroppers provided the labor. At harvest, the sharecropper usually had to give most of the crop to the landowner, and whatever remained belonged to the sharecropper. The goal was that the sharecropper was to save enough money from selling their share of the crops to one day be able to buy a farm. Only few achieved this dream, and most lived in a cycle of debt. They would buy on credit because they had little cash, and they hoped to pay off debt at harvest time. What is the importance of Plessy versus Ferguson? It approved the idea of separate but equal facilities for people based on race, and this led to segregation in trains, buses, schools, restaurants, and social institutions. Separate but equal led to unequal treatment of minority groups for decades to come. So, rebuilding the Southern industry went through cycles of good and bad as cotton prices went up and down. The hopeful industry, they were hopeful that the industry would strengthen the economy and lead to a new South. A new South would have a variety of industry to provide for a variety of needs. They didn't want to just rely on like cotton and tobacco like they did before. They're looking to build factories and provide jobs for the workforce. The most successful industrial development was the textile production. Textile mills would produce cotton fabric. They drew people from rural areas to provide a labor force, but African Americans are not allowed to work in the mills. Mill life, which we already talked about. The members from farm families were attracted to working at the cotton mills. Recruiters promised good wages and steady work, and it was easier way to make ends meet. They employed many women and children, and the children started working as early as age 12. Women were valued as workers, but they were not given opportunities to advance in the company. Mill work was hard work. Many did not enjoy their job, and they did not turn out the way the recruiters said it would. They would work 12 hours a day, 6 days per week. The cotton dust and lint in the air caused asthma and illness. The fast-moving machines were dangerous, would cause many injuries, and the wages remained low. All right, so that is it. Those are the Reconstruction plans. So overall, I just want you to take away from this that at the beginning of Reconstruction, you have some of the major plans. Lincoln's plan, Congressional Reconstruction, Johnson's plan for Reconstruction. And some parts go into effect in a sense. They have ideas, other things are built upon them. But in the end, due to the Panic of 1873, it kind of just falls apart. People are more concerned with the economy, not so concerned with exactly, what Reconstruction plan we're going to follow. And eventually the South kind of gets to get away with things such as black codes and the whole, separate but equal thing that was upheld by Plessy versus Ferguson. So it just kind of leads to some more bad issues that you'll learn about as we continue on through history next year. So yeah, that's it. The war's fought. The war is over. Plans to rebuild after the war. And then everybody just kind of keeps on living their life. Please go ahead and fill in the notes for this last section. And thank you for listening.